Okay, everybody. Coolness. Take your seats. My mother was a national school principal, so she used to always tell us to be quiet. Coolness was the biggest word in my home growing up. It worked. So we've got another great session now after our morning session, which will be hard to beat. But this looks like it's going to be equally good. Don't worry about time, because we've got a lot of kind of spare-ish time in the afternoon. We gave a lot of time to some of the sessions so we can make it up in the afternoon. Okay, we're going to talk now about no health without mental health. We've got 3 speakers. First up is someone many of you will know. He's nationally known. Tony Bates is the founding director of Headstrong, the National Centre for Youth Mental Health in Ireland. His core professional training is as a clinical psychologist with a really special interest in working with mindfulness-based programs in mental health settings. And we all know mindfulness, I mean, it's a buzzword at this stage. Everyone I seem to interview talks about the importance of mindfulness. He's going to talk to us today about the importance of one good adult in the life of a young person, and he'll be referring to research findings supporting this. I'll introduce our next 2 speakers as they come up. That's Martin Rogan and Marie Duffy. But please give a very warm welcome to Dr. Tony Bates.
Hello. Thank you. Can I be heard? Thank you, Dean, sound man. No, Dean, how are we doing? Am I being? This is it. Good. Look, we have, we thought we'd each say a few minutes, and then, we can sit and talk and be interviewed, and we can have some questions. I want to talk about one good adult, but I just want to be mindful for a minute of the fact that there are so many of you here, and it's an interesting question to ask: what on earth are you doing, and why are we here? And I've been thinking about that since I arrived this morning. Why are we here? And of course, it's because at some level you've been jolted by alarming news of young people dying much too soon, much too young, and other people not so young dying in similar ways. And also because you've been jolted into an awareness that this is something we need to talk about, and very cool people like Rezi and Frank and Alan have spoken about their experiences in a brutal, honest way. And so we're all realizing, hey, I've been there too. I've laid on my bed and not wanted to get out of bed. I have felt kind of a shudder of anxiety in my system and wondered, was I losing it? I have been terribly worried that I just simply didn't have what it takes to live my life and make a go of it. And so suddenly what has been, in the corners and the shadows of our life is something we're beginning to have the courage to talk about. But I also think we're here because, we've got it wrong for a long time. My generation and generations before, we've done the best we could, but we've got a lot of things wrong. We've had a very over-medicalized view of mental suffering. We've taken just the human condition, and which is very hard, and we've said, the important thing is that you feel good, and if you don't feel good, it's because you're not minding your mental health, and therefore you might be mentally ill. And that's frightening. I think that, as the Minister said, that there's a wide spectrum of experience, and mental health is making room for all of that and being able to be confident that we can live with all of that. Because our lives are always lived between being a mess and between being a mystery. They're somewhere in that spectrum. The other reason, though, I think we're here is that I really think we're trying to learn from what we have, what we've discovered is important and what we've found not to be so helpful, so that we put in place much better support systems for young people. And there are some young people here from the Youth Council and the Youth Advisory Panel in Jigsaw. And I think we're finally giving them a place and a voice, and we're listening to them, and we're trying to maybe leave things in a better place. my own GP said to me recently, he said, you're as happy as your least happy child. And you think about it, it's true. We parents tear our hair out about our children. When they're doing well and they've, won the All-Ireland Cup, that's great. We feel so proud and we feel we have done something right. But when they're not doing so well, when they're suffering, when they're unemployed, when they're not sure whether to emigrate, when they want to leave college and we wish they'd just finish, we tear our hair out. And it can be so difficult to know. And it's one of the toughest calls we make. How do we access help for them? And so I think we're here to try and think of better ways of doing things. And Donegal is the place to do it, because you guys have lived on the edge for a long time. You've lived in a way at the edge of the chaos of the rest of Europe and Ireland, and you have survived by being so deeply interconnected as a community. The connective tissue in Donegal is alive and well. There's blood flowing through it. In so many places it has become dry and it's broken. You remind me a little bit of Peg and her community in Dingle or in the Blasket Islands, and living on that edge. And when she asked about how they survived, she said, Shka, Cllr, Varis, Nadina. We lived in the shelter of one another. We only had one another. And her stories were, if you like, stories about they were mental health stories. They were stories about lust and murder and rage and jealousy and love and loss. And the woman had a patent on misery and loss, so much loss in her life. But somehow they managed to tell a bigger and bigger story that made space for all their experience and made them all feel that they were not weird and that they could live with this. So we're here for all of that. And it's a real tribute to you that you're breaking open this conversation. I saw a young girl yesterday, and just reminds me why we're here. She's 16, and her mother had come into our offices a few weeks ago. I don't see people myself, but she'd come in and said, you've got to help me with this. And this 16-year-old, I said, eventually bring her in, because I didn't know where to send her. It sounded just quite complex. And it was complex, and it is complex, but I wasn't sure at all where to refer her. And this girl for 2 years has been attending our local service, and she's been seeing different people, but nobody's really connected with her. And she was very, very depressed when she went in the beginning, and she's still very, very depressed. And I said, so nothing has made any difference? And she said, oh no, there's a lot of difference. She said, I'm worse. She said, I'm eating like I've doubled my body weight. I'm eating so much. My mother came because, she had been found self-harming. So she'd gotten worse. So there was good people, but nobody connected with her. And so mother had taken her then to another clinic where they for self-harm and a service for that. And they said, sorry, and she made a great connection there, but she said, sorry, we don't treat people who've got eating disorders. So then the mother went to an eating disorder organisation and said, could you help with this? And they said, sorry, she's not in our age group. She's 2 years younger than she has to be. And, there's something about the way our systems are so unintegrated. And with young people, you often get one chance. And when they are sent between all of these systems, they slip through the cracks. And that's, I think, something we're trying to repair. And I'll come back to that in talking about Jigsaw. But mental health, what is it? It's really being able to live within your own skin and actually feel good, reasonably good, even half okay about who you are. And actually, it's knowing what you love and knowing and feeling that you have the confidence to go after that. And it's having some idea, as Charlie was saying, how to work with this thing that we all were born with called the mind, because the instruction manual stayed in the womb. It never came out with us, and none of us know quite how to manage it. And part of the success of life is knowing how to manage it. Very simple things. It's knowing how to eat and exercise and sleep and rest and do things like that. But it's also knowing how to deal with very strong emotions and how not to get trapped, not to get lost in dark places that we hit in our lives. mental health is also about having relationships. None of us gets there alone. None of you has got to where you are here today without the help of somebody, and without some significant relationships. And so being able to build and nurture and take care of those relationships is our mental health. We did a study in Headstrong, and Headstrong is trying to change how we think about young people and mental health, and do things differently so that they don't get lost and there is somewhere to turn. And it's all happening in language that makes sense to them and in ways that work for them and their families, because they don't exist outside their families. They have, all of them, families. And that complex system needs to be looked after and always remembered, and Frank made us very aware of that beautifully. But we did this research to figure out, what is it about mental health? What is it that really matters? I mean, some people, maybe they're born that way, or some people are actually just have terrible traumas that, of course they'd feel lost and depressed. And how is it some people make it through and some people don't? So we conducted the largest mental health survey in the world. We had 20 scales, and I'm not going to bore you with statistics, but each of these measured something very carefully in ways that were particularly known to be reliable, okay? And some of them measured positive things like connectivity and optimism and all the rest, and some measured depression, anxiety, trauma, psychosis, suicidal feelings, so on, sexual health. And we kind of got 18,000 people to complete these, and we had cleaned up data on 14,300. That's 1.5 million data points. And we were able then to ask all of that data questions. So we asked the data, what is it that predicts survival, And this is interesting. It might be age, it might be where you're from, it might be this, but actually it was a number of things, of course, but the most dominant predictor of survival, of resilience, of mental health was the availability in a young person's life of at least one adult who knew them personally, who believed in them, and who was available to them. And that was so stunning and so powerful in its predictive power that we kind of said to ourselves, this is like finding something very secretive, And we started thinking. And as Frank said, it could be an older person, an older, peer. But actually, what we found in the qualitative things they wrote was that it was actually an adult. For many, that adult was one of their parents. But some homes fall into chaos, I know mine did in my adolescence. And it wasn't that my parents didn't love me, but I just couldn't tell them about what was happening with me because so much was going on for them. So, and I think many families throughout our country are a bit like that at the moment. So, but there was always somebody there that kind of looked out for me and drove me to the match, or that, maybe just looked out a little bit. I didn't even know it. But my good adult was my godmother, and she was Nuala, and she was down in Cork. And she was a Cork woman like our minister. And she, because I'm a Cork person actually, I was born there too. But she was the one who really looked out for me. And it wasn't, and again this is important, because I know that all of you here are good adults in the lives of probably many young people, not just in your own family, but beyond your family. And you may even not appreciate it. Those of you in youth work, those of you in education, those of you in sports are absolutely so close and so powerfully important. My aunt would bake apple tarts, and we'd sit in the kitchen down in St. Luke's Cross in Cork. And I didn't say to her, I'm suffering with an identity crisis, and I have anxiety, and I have depression, and my self-esteem is a bit rocky. I didn't talk like that. I talked about life. I talked about the things that I felt were important. And she listened. And she listened to me, but she also believed in me. And when my leaving was done, we were walking down Summerhill to Kent Station. I was getting on the train. She said, what are you going to do now? And in those days, we didn't have great career guidance. Not in my school, anyway. And I said, I think I'll go to university. And she said, what will you do? I said, I'm thinking of doing medicine. And she said, oh, good. She said, I thought you were going to settle for a low profile. And I said to myself, holy sugar. It was a shudder went through me. Do you know what the shudder was? That some adult actually believed I had something in me, and they expected something of me. And that was, really powerfully. It just gripped me. And when I did my PhD in '94, I dedicated it to Nuala. And I said, your voice has always been in my head, and it's carried me through some very dark times. Times that you might not have known about, but I never forgot the way she looked at me and the way she expected something. And I remember having a row with my wife, many rows with my wife, but I remember one particular one, and I said to her, in the way guys do, I said, you just don't accept me the way I am, and this was true, she didn't. And she said, you're damn right. She said, I have hopes for you. And it was, I realised there's a real love in actually believing in somebody and wanting them to go on. So that good adult, and that good adult is the person who gives gifts of time and presence and tolerance and hangs in and just is there. And I don't think you've any estimate of how important that is. And yet all of us, if we were to sit here, we could have a wonderful conversation about the good adults in our life. I was doing this with some of the Irish rugby team, and I was asking them who was their good adult, and Brian O'Driscoll put his hand up immediately and said, "Me ma." It was his ma. Yeah, and he said, "Oh God, it should be Amy." No, it was the ma, and it still is the ma. She's an amazing woman, but he trusted her and talked to her. But I think it's very important that every young person has a good adult. Jigsaw is a place, I suppose, for people who may not have that good adult, or who need something more, who need a certain kind of pair of safe hands that can actually maybe respond to something that's more complex, and do it very early, and do it in a place that's friendly and in a way that's not threatening and in language that doesn't unnecessarily frighten people. And within that service, I mean, over the last few years across the country, Jigsaw Donegal is probably our most shining service at the moment, because it has a fantastic team backed up by years careful planning with Lee Ted Stone and Anne Sheridan and John Hayes and people like that who were amazing leaders, people who are behind the scenes leading all this. And then the team that are there now, just an amazing team, and young people that are around them. And I was at the opening, and I mean, they just stunned all of us with their insight and their sensitivity and so on. But Jigsaw across the country, we've seen 4,500 people, and we try to track very carefully the kind of problems that present and what seems to matter. And one of the things we've seen is that, when people present, the most dominant symptom or presentation is something physical. So young guys don't come in, like I was joking a minute ago, and say, I'm having a bad day, I'm not sure of where I'm going in my life, and I'm not sure if my life is meaningful. If they don't talk like that. They come in and they're full of tension and frustration and anxiety, and they don't have language. And particularly guys, but I think also women. And what we found is that's the most first thing that presents across 4,500. And the second is that it's kind of there acting that out. And what we've realised is that the stress that is inside us, that doesn't have words, gets acted out in symptoms and in repeated acts of self-harm. And it's like people are trying to find a way to release. And part of what we're trying to do is to connect with people and to help them to put a story on what's happening so they can hold that and deal with that. Jim Ryan is a manager working with Martin Rogan down in Dublin in the HSC, and a wonderful guy, and he's been working a lot with Jigsaw in Tala and Clondalkin. But he's telling us what he does for his own mental health is he coaches under-14 hurling team. And he was saying the difference between them on a Tuesday night and a Sunday morning is extraordinary. Tuesday night, they all get dropped off to the practice, and they get out and they're, and they pick up the hurleys like they're picking up swords, and they nearly go for each other. And it's just, it's really an explosion of energy, pent-up energy and frustration. They've been sitting all day in a classroom, and they've been sitting still trying to learn stuff, and that's not a natural way for a 14-year-old to be doing all the time, so or under 14. So they let off steam, and he's really brilliant at understanding they need to let off steam, and yet curtailing that so they don't actually behead each other. And any sports coach knows about that. Sunday they're calmer and they play, and the parents are there, and it's fine. They all behave themselves. It's very gentlemanly like. I think, to me, that's where sport and services like Jigsaw really meet. It's that on the one hand, mental health is a very physical thing, and it's about finding ways to express and use our energies, even our anger and our frustration and our rage. At the same time, that can get out of hand, and we can start hiding it, and then reverting into gambling and into other things, and problems that began maybe as a small crisis grow legs, and suddenly we've left school or we've left the club or we're out there and we now have developed an addiction, or we're misusing substances. And I think the whole thing here is that we're trying to get to people before they grow legs, before problems grow legs. Yes, I need to stop. Okay. And I will now stop. But so that's really what I have to say. I think that I know I had a joke to finish, but I've forgotten it. But it'll come back to me in a minute. It was a very good joke. But I do think the other reason we're here that I haven't said, I suppose, is that for all of us growing up, the great fear we had in our life is that our daughters would be pregnant outside of marriage, or that our sons would make somebody pregnant outside of marriage. It wasn't even cancer, it was pregnancy. And that's changed, hasn't it? And it's something else now, and we're terrified. And I think it's very good that we're not afraid to look at that and to talk about those things without scaring the life out of each other, but just actually to be honest. And that's what I love about being here today. Thank you.
Thanks a million, Tony. I need you when I'm in my studio and I can't get the politicians to shut up. She could just walk up in front of them and eyeball them, and they stop talking like Tony. Anyway, that was really interesting. We're going to have a questions and answer session at the end of these three, so don't worry, there'll be questions. Right, next up, I know this man, I've interviewed him many times, he's very impressive. Martin Rogan's professional background is in nursing, both psychiatric and general, and he's worked in the mental health field for the past 27 years. As Assistant National Director for Mental Health, Martin has a leadership role working with all stakeholders in mental health in Ireland, and he's got special responsibility for implementing the 2006 Vision for Change service reform. He's also a member of Ireland's Mental Health Commission. He's going to talk to us today about the direction of mental health services in Ireland. Give a warm welcome to Martin Rogan.
Are you going to be serious in that? I think we should move over.
So I'm a little bit like the Minister. I need a smaller podium. But, so if I look a bit like Cllr here peeking out over the top of the podium, if you check out my taller twin on the far side, it might be easier. So just to say, this is a remarkable event on a number of fronts. It's Friday morning, and 500 people have come out and travelled from all over the county and further afield to talk about mental health and talk about recovery and talk about how sport has a real role to play in that, and how communities are very active in that piece as well. And as Miriam said in my introduction, one of my roles is for implementing Vision for Change, which has about 4 values in it. So it's about building a service around the service user. It's about re-engaging with your community in social inclusion. It's about protecting and promoting positive mental health. And it's about recovery. And the question is, where does recovery happen? So what I really like about this event is you're actually supporting recovery through lots of different activities and lots of different levels, in terms of when people engage with sport, they have a sense of belonging. They're part of a shared activity. They're getting physical exercise. But I think, as the Minister mentioned in brief this morning, you also get that extraordinary sense of success when you work together. And you also get experience that not everything is a success, that you can be defeated, but you get back up. And that's what recovery is about. It's not about everything being plain sailing, because life doesn't really work that way, not for most people. It's about when you get knocked, how you understand that, how you interpret it, how you don't feel that you've collapsed and become a failure and that you're somehow rejected, but actually that you have more to offer. And this is a message that we need to know, particularly in our current economic environment, that the system doesn't have to be punitive. When people are entrepreneurial and they get out and they try something new, if they don't succeed, we need to have a system that allows them to get back up and try again. And that's certainly one of the key messages for this morning. But I think another thing that was mentioned is when a person feels that their mental health is failing, they often feel that they're unique, that they're alone, that they're separate, that they're different, and they're comparing their internal landscape with other people's experience. And everyone else seems to be getting on fine, they're smiling, they're happy, they're successful, they're in relationships, their life is going forward, and they don't feel that way. And sometimes even their exterior to other people looks like everything is fine. Sometimes it's not fine. And there can be a sense of self-stigma and a sense of self-defeat. And we need to get past that. And that's why an event like today, when people have gone to that brink and gone to the edge, and somebody reached out to them, perhaps a professional, perhaps one good adult, somebody in their community, who found a very particular connection with them, that said, I value you, you're important for yourself, and you're important to me, and you're important to our community, we need you, and we need you to come forward with us. And that's, a key message that's so important in Ireland today. I think the opening presentation was really remarkable, and it was a little bit like a L'Oreal ad, because you had the science in terms of the clinical perspective, but you had the real lived experience in terms of the real relationship that's key to good quality mental health care. And I think when you're starting with recovery, it's about relationship. I think Dr. Sharkey said it, we heard it from the behaviour therapists as well. It's about, I need to know your story. I need to know not that you're a collection of symptoms standing in front of me. You're a person in a context, and it's about a relationship. Now, in the health services, things can get very busy at times, but sometimes you can get so busy that you're actually not achieving anything. In primary care, for a GP, for example, a GP is trained to actually work with an individual on 7 minutes. So it's 2 minutes meeting, greeting, seating, 2 minutes form a diagnosis, 2 minutes formulate a treatment, and 1 minute to get you safely back out the door again, dressed or not in some instances. So how can we make sure that there's a team of people around the GP so that they're not working single-handedly, and as well as that the burden for them to meet so many people? About 35% of GPs' work relates to mental health issues. So that's an extraordinary burden of people coming each time we want to give very personal attention to. We need to put the relationship back in with the stethoscope here. But people won't come forward for treatment if they don't believe it's successful. Most of our mental health services, the vast majority, are provided free of charge with no cash payment. However, socially they can be very expensive, and that's why an event like today is so important. It's about saying there is help there. Come and step over the threshold, take a chance, take your courage, come forward. But people will only do that if there's a prospect of success, if there's a prospect of getting yourself back and reaching your community and being accepted and not rejected in some way. And I think we've really learned a lot about that in the last number of years. So who does recovery belong to? Whose responsibility is it? Who is it to do this? Essentially, we all have a shared responsibility here. All of us, every single one of us in the room. And as Tony has just said, whether you are the one good adult or require the one good adult, we take turns in those roles. So every one of us here has a relationship with each other, and certainly some of the work we've done with young people in Ireland, they have a really strong understanding of mental health issues, not just in a selfish way for themselves, but they're very keen to assist others. And we can see this in Jigsaw, we can see it in Don and Ode, Corlin and Ode, and a variety of other ways across the country. So young people in Ireland have a much more mature attitude to mental health issues than certainly my generation had. I think it was mentioned earlier that in Ireland in the past, we didn't really know how best to support an individual who had that sense of isolation and alienation. And unfortunately, we grew a system that actually encouraged that belief. In 1956, in Ireland, we held the world record for psychiatric hospitalisation. There were 22,000 people living in psychiatric hospitals. And they often had a very limited life. They had their bed and board, they had treatment, they had relationship, but it was in a very confined way. And I think a much more articulate image for this is Cllr's painting. Because if you look at Cllr's painting, you can see the bee trapped in the honey jar, but there's a little tag on it, I'm not sure if you can see it from where you're sitting, but it says, "Do not open." And certainly, when we look at the tradition in this area, we had this very large hospital. As recent as 30 years ago, 750 people lived there. And the question, it seemed impossible, do not open. But it has opened. Not that it's closed down, there are no patients there anymore, but the service has opened up and has become closer to where people are and live out their real lives, and that's the space we need to get to. So this is different. These buildings go back 150 years in some instances, and they've kind of worked their way into the public imagination and the popular understanding of mental health issues, and that has led to an expectation. I think, as Tony's just said, having an adult who has an expectation of you, who wants for you and wants you to be what you can be, so that you can be yourself and enjoy yourself. And that's a little phrase we use every day, enjoy yourself when your kids are going out in the evening. But what we're actually saying is enjoy yourself, enjoy being yourself, feel comfortable with yourself, celebrate that. don't have this sense of despair or sense of shame or sense of embarrassment. It's about being yourself and celebrating that sense. So about creating expectations, and with our mental health service we have to generate a new expectation, not just for mental health professionals. It's an occupational hazard for us. We talk to ourselves all the time. This is the kind of audience we need to speak to, a non-traditional audience of people who are right across the community and woven into the community. There's a cartoon I sometimes use when we're describing this. This picture here, incidentally, was a postcard, because the people of Donegal were really proud of the psychiatric hospital they built, and they had lots of reasons to be proud of that. So it was actually produced as a postcard. I'm not sure you'd wish you were here, but it was a postcard nonetheless.
Like, I'm here.
So with recovery, it is about expecting the unexpected. And this cartoon shows a couple of cows chatting in a field, and one of them notices there's a car coming, so they have to sit down and eat the grass like everyone expects cows to behave. And when they're not being watched, they go back to the way they were. And sometimes we expected, when a person hit a crisis, developed a mental illness, the expectation was, that's it, their life is over, the credits are coming up. We need to care for them and mind them in a very particular way. We need to move beyond that. This is why, with the previous policy document, Planning for the Future, it was about moving away from institutions, it was about providing service in the community, it was about moving our acute units to acute hospitals. All of this has been achieved here in this county and throughout the country now at this stage, and creating day hospitals and day centres. But it didn't quite say what you would do when you got there. And it is about being actively engaged in your community through sport, through various clubs, through various interests. You use the real community, not a psychiatric version of the community. With Vision for Change, it's built on this, taking it a step forward, and it's about looking at the individual. What do you want for your life, and how can we assist you to get to that? And that's what's really very different about Vision, but it is building on a good platform. We now have better technologies, we have a better understanding, we have better therapies, we have better medications indeed, which have a role to play, but not a blanket role. And now recovery is a very real prospect. And this is why it's so important that your mayor has come out and said, I've been there, I've got my way back. And while you wouldn't choose this as a course in self-development and strengthening yourself, you come back a better person. And so many people who do well, who avail of mental health services, find it impossible to have that conversation. They airbrush this piece out of the equation. So we do need people who can illustrate the return journey, and that's what's so important about today. In our services, there's a new understanding, because sometimes people use the word recovery and rehabilitation in the same breath. This is a photo from the grounds of St Mary's Hospital in Castlebar, which was a very large psychiatric hospital. Now it's a third-level college, the GMIT. But you can see the signpost has two forks on it. It throws recovery is one direction and continuing care is another. And there is no doubt there are many individuals who have had the most devastating experiences, and continuing care is a real prospect. But we always have to make sure that we don't quench their hope of recovery, and we allow a space where that can happen. In terms of Vision, talks about happening in a different place and a different type of service. So, are we team players? Well, certainly in the whole area of mental health, there are different types of teams we work with. We're going to say a little bit about this because I'm conscious of time. But sometimes it's a very large team, a rugby team. Sometimes it's a smaller team. We don't have the occasional golfer, but we do have people who play solo. But we're very conscious that many people for far too long have been bowling alone. And we need to get to a space where the team not just comes together as a full team with the various professions, but actually it functions as a team. We're spending about €2 million on enhancing team working. We've trained 45 facilitators to help teams to get the best benefit of being a team. Like in sport, we need to understand the dynamic. It's more than just the players. There's an effect beyond the individual players. So in terms of recovery is a team sport. And in the past we depended very heavily on doctors and nurses, with very few psychologists, social workers, occupational therapists, speech and language therapists. With new investment, and Minister Lynch has been absolutely key to this, we're growing new teams and enhancing the teams we already have. So there's a lot of work happening in this area, but it's important that we bring all of the various skill sets into play. That's an absolutely critical part of this work. We are in a new reality in terms of the level of investment we can put to this, but we're working in a very sensible way of recasting old resource as new resource. We've seen lots of our staff leaving through retirement, and that's been a huge challenge. Two of our star players you met this morning are retired staff members. We need to make sure there's a new generation coming behind, and that we have to hold our investment in order to do that. So in terms of the investment this year, for our general adult teams, our child and adolescent mental health teams, a key part of today's message as well, our services for older persons who often suffer very severe mental health issues, our teams for people with an intellectual disability, doubly challenged, in terms of our forensic teams for people who run into difficulty with the law, again, quite a growing area, and the enhancing team working we mentioned as well, and the collaborative leadership. We've developed a programme at DCU, and this county has been very well represented there, where service users and family members and professionals train together in an accredited course to change, manage and leadership, so that we don't just bring the HSE viewpoint, we bring the service user and the family member viewpoint into play when we're changing our service and developing it. And no other part of the health system does that. And a new service that's coming on stream is called CPSI. And a number of people who asked questions this morning, can we get access to psychotherapy? It was mentioned in terms of in the UK they developed a system called IAPT. It's improved access to psychotherapy. Ours is called CPSI, and it's a new service for adults, so it's counselling in primary care. And essentially, it's a service that's available, it's part of the programme for government, and it's basically available to people who have a medical card for adults, and it goes live in July, so just another month's time. The service will be available right across the country. We've recruited our coordinators, we've got the training in place, and we're working with counsellor coordinators across the country. So again, over 13,000 people will be able to avail of this service this year. So this is a brand new service, and it's offering the GP and the primary care team another option, not just a medication-based option. So again, these are positive pieces that are coming forward. And it's about, as we said earlier, that it allows the individual to rejoin their community in a very constructive way with new confidence and a new sense of purpose in terms of where they're going into the future. So essentially, I think one of the people who asked the question this morning encapsulated very well. Recovery is perhaps becoming a technical term, but essentially it's a word that means hope. And our role as a mental health service is to get to people at the earliest possible opportunity so that we can restore their hope and return them back to their real world. Thank you.
Thanks a million for that, Martin. Very interesting. Now, our third speaker in this session, well, she's wonderful. Her name is Marie Duffy. She's a mental health activist who's won awards for her advocacy and articles dealing with mental health. She's inspiring, energetic, passionate and caring. She's also a graduate of media and journalism. She set up a great blog, www.unwindyourmind.ie, to promote well-being and to encourage having a 5 a day for your mental health. She longs for the day, she says, when looking after your mental health is as natural as brushing your teeth. She's going to talk to us now what people need when they are experiencing mental health issues. Give a very warm welcome to Marie Duffy.
Hi everyone, as you heard, my name is Marie Duffy, and today I'm here as editor of the national youth website spunout.ie. Some of you may have heard of us, some of you might not. For those who haven't heard of us, we're a website for 16 to 25-year-olds, and we provide information on everything that affects young people. So things like health, employment, education, going to college, life, and much more. We also provide a platform for young people to have their voices heard on issues that affect them. So to start off, I want to give you a quote from Stephen King, which for me sums up what it's like to go through a tough time and what it's really like when you can't speak to somebody. Okay, so the quote is, "The most important things are the hardest to say. They are the things you get ashamed of, because words diminish them. That's the worst, I think, when the secret stays locked within, not for want of a teller, but for want of an understanding ear." So that's a quote from Stephen King from Different Seasons, and although he wasn't talking about mental health, for me he sums up exactly what it's like to suffer from mental health stigma and to go through a tough time. The statistic tells us that 1 in 4 people will suffer from a mental health problem, but working with Spun Out and having been involved as a mental health activist, I know that every one of us will experience a mental health problem at some stage. Despite the fact that mental ill health is common, people experiencing it can often find themselves facing stigma and discrimination. So today I'm here to talk about young people and what it's like being a young person going through a tough time. For many young people, I know it was for me, the journey into adulthood is a confusing and difficult road to travel. Many young people are reluctant to seek help from family, friends and mental health services. But why is this? At Spun Out, young people tell us that mental health is the #1 issue facing them today. And this is reflected by the article submissions we receive every day. Every single day we receive an email or an article submission from some young person who is going through a tough time. Often these stories are an example of how the young person has managed to come through a tough time with much support from family and friends. As a result, they want to share their story with other young people and encourage others to seek help. On our Spun Out website, we have a section that is by young people, it's for young people, and it's true life stories of things that they have gone through themselves. Young people have told us that that is the most powerful part of our website. It allows others to see that they're not alone in what they're going through and that someone else has gone through the same thing. And I think we've seen that today when we've heard from other people speaking about their own mental health struggle and their experience. It's so powerful. In my opinion, it's only through talking, going to conferences like this and speaking in the community about mental health that we can break down the stigma associated with mental illness. In preparation for today's conference, I spoke with some of our young people who use Spun Out and asked them what stops them from seeking help when they need it. Some of the things that came up included a sense of shame about feeling down and most of all being unable to find the words to tell someone how they feel. The cost associated with accessing services like a GP or a counsellor, the stigma associated with accessing those services, and the fear of being labelled as mentally ill, and long waiting lists to access a service. So how can we address these issues for our young people? How can we help them through tough times? The young people I spoke to emphasised the importance of learning to look after their mental health from an early age. They felt this should be something that's taught from primary school level. They also felt that there was too strong an emphasis on clinical diagnosis and that there should be less of a focus on mental illness and coping when you feel bad, but instead more of a focus on well-being and how to stay well. The young people I spoke to were very clear that the only way to get young people to use the mental health services was to consult with young people and involve them in both the service delivery and design. Young people have said that they want accessible services that are staffed by people that they feel that they can trust, have an ability to listen, and most of all help them feel secure at a time when it feels like everything else is falling apart. Most of all, young people want to be involved in the decisions that are made about them. That's why it's so important to involve young people in service development. That's why services such as Jigsaw Donegal are so important. Young people have been involved in interviewing of the staff, the building design, and in advising on the way the service is delivery. This is key. When it comes to finding experts in youth mental health, you don't have to go no further than young people themselves. We need to listen to them. We need to ask them what they want. So how can we support our young people in our community? It starts with each and every one of us. Each one of us can make a difference. We all need to take collective responsibility in tackling mental health stigma and can start by taking the time to talk about mental health with the people around us. You might have seen some of the people today wearing the green ribbons, and that's part of Sea Change's campaign to stamp out the stigma associated with mental health. So there's a stand down there that has the ribbons. Pick one up, pin it on your top, and just start talking to someone about mental health. Unfortunately, we can't rely on the politicians. It's up to us as individuals to stand up for what we believe. We know mental health is important. Young people are telling us mental health is important, so we need to make it a priority. We've lost too many young people to suicide, and we need to ensure that our young people get the support when they need it, most of all, as soon as they can. It's so easy to get caught up in the doom and gloom of this recession. We need to build resilient young people who can cope with the challenges that are put in their way. We need to give them hope. We need to reassure them that when things get difficult, everything will be okay. They can get through it, and a big part of that is helping them to protect their dreams, hopes and ambitions from being chipped away by those who say, no, you can't. If you do one thing today when you leave this conference, Make sure that you go home and talk to someone about mental health. It doesn't have to be about your own personal experience. Just ask someone how they are. And to finish off today, I'd like to give you a quote from Franklin Roosevelt. We cannot always build our future for the youth, but we can build our youth for the future. It's so important that we support our young people. Thank you.
Great news. Fantastic. That was wonderful, Marie. Thanks so much. And I'm going to throw it to the floor. And I already have one hand up. We're going to take a roving mic. So if there's a young woman here in the front row. Yeah. Of course you're young.
I just wanted to know, what advice would you give to a parent who knows their child is feeling down about something but won't and doesn't want to go to somebody and speak about it?
Good question, actually.
Well, the first thing I think is, Marie, do you want to have a...
Yeah.
Yeah, I think... I'm happy to... but I think... Let's ask the expert here. Just,
Thanks, Tony.
Yeah.
Put me on the spot.
Yeah.
I know in my own experience, and for lots of the young people we've spoken to, it's often very hard to speak to someone close to you. It's often a lot easier to speak to a stranger, but getting that person to the stranger is often the difficult part. I think all you can do is encourage them and let them know that you're there for them whenever they need to speak to you, and that things will get better. I think that can often be difficult as a parent looking on, and it can be very, very frustrating. But unfortunately, you can't force the process, in my opinion. It has to happen naturally. And maybe it's just a matter of Jigsaw and Donegal are fantastic. They're based in Letterkenny but have an outreach service around the county. And I think that maybe it's about contacting someone in Jigsaw, and they're very well equipped to working with young people. And maybe it's about them speaking to the young person in question.
Okay, do you want to add to that, Tony?
Well, I mean, I think this is probably the most asked question I get every day. Parents ring up and they are just tearing their hair out of that question. So it's a really difficult one. And I think the first thing I always say is, look, just don't underestimate what you're doing already. You know, that just being there and just making them tea and toast and just, you know, kind of tolerating them wandering around the house with their music plugged in and just sulking. You know, that actually means an awful lot, and it might not seem to be important, but it is. And like, you're there and you're available, but that doesn't mean they're ready, you know. And I think for young people, it's not just that they're not talking, but they really don't know how to say what they're experiencing. So they struggle with what to say and how to say it, and things they can't talk about. So, you know, even when we get together, we sometimes have this naive idea that if we just put them beside Mr. X or Miss Y, it'll all pour out and it'll be beautifully resolved. It often takes years. It takes time and a lot of wild and intangential conversations before you get to what it is. I look at my own kids, and I often think I had two boys and a girl, and the windows to a boy's soul opened very briefly, and so I spent a lot of time, you know, we did a lot of sports stuff together actually, but we weren't talking psychologically too often, but there were times, and those times tended to come when I least expected them. Driving back from the cinema on a Friday night, when I was tired and it was dark and they were sitting in the front seat and we weren't looking at each other, you know, or with my daughter, who was somebody with whom the romance of the century ended when she turned 13, I became a complete embarrassment. Please, Dad. You know, and yet, you know, there were moments, and I always have the conversation in an indirect way, and she'd talk about somebody in class, like who was, you know, I'd say, gosh, you know, that's terrible. How would that happen? Or, you know,
yeah.
And you kind of use those openings, but it's hanging in and it's watching for openings, you know, and don't underestimate just how much that means. You know, just that you're holding them in a place that's hard for them, but maybe this is they're walking through it. You know,
really good advice. Another question? Yeah, we'll go to this side. To be fair, There's another young woman in the second row there, and then I see the other person. Yeah, we might get a microphone to the second row on this side, if that's possible. Yeah, thanks a million.
Hi, I'm Laura McCormick and I'm from the Donegal Youth Council, and we're doing a mental health roadshow across Donegal, and I was just wondering if you should have any advice for us doing the roadshow.
And it's interesting, why are you doing the roadshow? Have some of you been affected by it, or?
No, it's just we want to help people across Donegal best we can, and we're the Youth Council, so we can kind of relate to young people in a way.
Okay, Martin.
I think the fact that you're doing a roadshow is really, really useful. It's initiative coming from young people. I would probably borrow one of the ideas you see here today in terms of there are lots of agencies who really have a strong presence here in Donegal. And they're very happy to be part of this. But I think in terms of the fact that it's actually growing naturally out of the community, one of the things I'm always conscious of as HSE, we always try and promote certain things, and sometimes that can feel a bit contrived or a bit artificial or a bit forced. Actually, what you're doing is very organic, and you know where young people are at. If you look at, say, for example, our TV ad on Minding Your Mental Health, lookaftermentalhealth.ie, we brought in a very high-powered ad agency, and they had all sorts of wonderful ideas, and we had a group of young people involved. And the grown people looked at it in a bored way, like my teenagers look at me at times, and said, nah, it's not going to work. And they redressed it, they reset it, they made the story, and I see the concept of where the young person doesn't recognise himself has now been stolen by 3 or 4 other agencies as a concept of how to communicate a message. So you have the expertise, you know the message that young people are ready for, and I think Tony's point there a moment ago and Marie's point in terms of readiness is a key part. Have it in a space that people feel naturally comfortable, where they naturally gather, and where there's good transport links. And I know that's a real challenge here in the county. But if there's good focal points where people are already coming together and feel comfortable, I think you're on a winner. But the fact that it's your own idea and you can connect with other young people and you can use Cllr and other approaches like Jigsaw as well as partners in that. And it is a partnership approach. And I think there's a lot of agencies here today who'd be very happy to assist with that.
It's good. And I'm going to go to this side and I'll come back to this side. There's a microphone, just there. Yeah.
Martin McBrearty, as Misha Jurhar board, Bolu at Farvaha, Atpila, Donegal, Toronto. My name is Martin McBrearty. I'm a board director of Donegal Local Development Company. Lurch and Tara, Kathleen Lynch, Goal and Pobble, August Grippy Pobble, Abalta, and Lan Ayanu, her son, and Rod Shaw, August, her son, and Scale, a Cur Amach, and Scale, it's okay to be not okay, Caleb. I find as Secretary of North Donegal Community Network, for example, we promoted recently an event on suicide, stress, depression, involving many of the groups here today, like Console and Grow and the Irish Farmers Association Social and Family Affairs Committee. And we would find more organisations working collaboratively on the subject. And we had another event with the group Suicide or Survive. And Bidini Ikanch Amach Igra and a scale Fian Maravi and Frank McBrearty.
A kind. Agus an bhfuil ceist agat, Martin.
Today.
An bhfuil ceist agat. An bhfuil ceist agat. Have you got a question?
Yield ceist ata me ra goal alan the janu leis na pobl agus grippy pobl community networks agus mar sin Maria be Siawad níos fearr da me Jeannie Dini Nakolan Shaw about the Kanch, about the Chat Guji,
Okay.
Crony Bega Mar Avimi a Kancha.
Okay, well listen, Gurmagad Martin. Kesh Stella, and another question? We'll go back to this side. There you go.
When I look at the people and personnel on the stage, and then I look behind you, I see 2 mirrors, and to your right, I see a black wall. My sadness would be for those who commit suicide. I would take that word out of the dictionary altogether. I think myself that, having worked in the health service, I went to the States immediately after training. And there I found that nursing personnel were automatically working with psychiatric as their everyday life, along with general nursing. And so there was very little divide between either. That didn't simplify it, but nevertheless, coming back to Dublin then, I told them what I had done, that I'd worked in acute care. And I remember working with a young man, and I thought, oh my gosh, I won't be able to relate to this young man. So I was told to shadow. Shadow would be walking with them everywhere, including to the toilets. So that's what I did. To begin with, we didn't say very much. And then all of a sudden we were supposed to move to another area. And every minute the nurse would come in the window or in the door and she would say, don't forget your pillows. And that got the pair of us laughing. Another one came then and she said, don't forget the pillows. So we were to pick up the bedliner and go to this new unit. And eventually the strangeness between us broke down. I explained who I was, that I didn't really work within the hospital, but that I was there for him for whatever length it took. I think what we lack now maybe is time. Years ago, okay, there was too much institutional care, including maybe the staff who worked there as well. But now there's no time. There's no work. And for somebody who's up against the black wall, they say they can't pick up a phone. They can't talk to somebody. And sad as it is, when they can't communicate, then their only out is to end their lives. I would love to have answers for all of that. Thank you.
Thank you. I suppose the issue that maybe there aren't enough services, there isn't enough time now for people, Martin.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a huge challenge for us, there's no doubt about that, in terms of not just having people in place, but actually that they have sufficient time. And I think, taking the quote there, sometimes the most important conversation is the most difficult conversation. It's not one that you're going to venture out with, it's not one you're going to start with. And many people who use our service come with tester issues in the first instance. Many people who go to their GP will talk about backache or stomach aches, whatever else, and eventually what they want to talk about is their feelings. But the time isn't often there for that. And I think sometimes we depend on health professionals trying to replicate what communities do really better. There's a really fantastic piece of work done in the Dublin area called Enabling Recovery. And they brought together some befrienders, people who didn't have a health training or background, with people who use mental health services. And they formed a relationship. The project was very simple. They were given €20 to do something, whatever it was. Go to a match, go to the cinema, try something new, take a bus ride, whatever. Just do something. And there was no limitation put on it. There was one young man who smoked his €20. Another paid off his ESB bill. But everyone else did something. And there was one lady who used to turn up in an emergency department 3 times a week, and she rang the emergency department one night to say, listen, I can't make it tonight, I'm going to the pictures. Okay? And they were worried about her. Where was she? But it was about relationship. And sometimes that has to be a skilled, structured relationship, but more often than not, it's about human contact. And that human contact is very, very difficult to replicate and reproduce, and it doesn't work easily over a 12-hour shift. I've worked as a nurse for many years, and trying to stay in that zone in that way is very difficult. So I think what you're describing there, when Chad Cllr, the man who established the Samaritans, he was a pastor, and there had been a tragedy where a young girl who was coming into menstruation, she was terrified, she thought she was dying, and she took her own life. And he was the pastor in her parish, and he was officiating at her funeral, and he thought, this should never happen again. So he set himself up in a small office at the back of the pastor's office, where he would listen to people. And a lot of people came forward. So he asked a few parishioners, will you make a cup of tea and a sandwich just while people are waiting? And he found, after the end of the session, when he went out to see who's next, he discovered the people who were waiting were fine because they had human contact. It wasn't the skilled intervention they particularly needed, it was the human connection. And when I worked in the mental health service in Cllr, as I was telling someone this earlier, there was a man whose mother lived up in the far end of West Wicklow, up on the top of the mountains, and he used to send her a postcard every day, so the postman would call. So there was human contact every single day. The postman wasn't a therapist, he wasn't highly skilled, he wasn't highly trained, but he would bring the news and he would bring some human contact. And I think we need to be careful that we don't psychiatrize or try and recreate that, because that genuine relationship, which we see here today, is so powerful and can't be easily artificially made.
Okay. Have I got another question from the floor? And if not, I can break this session. Okay, well look, I was incredibly impressed by the three speakers here. So thank you to Tony, Martin and Marie. And I am now going to ask them to depart the stage, and I'm bringing on three more. I'm very fickle. So look, next up, just before I introduce the three of them, because we're going to get them mic'd, I was given a list of top tips for people to mind your mind. I was kind of drop them in during the day, but I'm going to give them all to you at once, which is throughout the day, what you're meant to do is, if you're feeling stressed and how to mind your mind, these are the top tips. You're meant to keep physically active, okay? That's very important, and even today, sport and mental health, everyone talks about the importance of physical exercise, whatever that is. So keep physically active, eat well, drink in moderation, value yourself and value others. If you don't value yourself, no one's going to value you. Talk about your feelings. Keep in touch with your friends and your loved ones. Care for others. Get involved and make a contribution to your community. Learn new skills. Do something creative. Take a break and ask for help. So they're all the things, and they all just are common sense really, but it's worth remembering them. Okay, next up we have another trio of great speakers. First up I have Anne-Marie McDade, and she is a Paralympian. She's a Donegal native. She now lives in Dublin with her partner Peter. She was diagnosed 6 years ago when she was 42 with MS. She's got fantastic things to say. She talks about her 10-minute rule for all bad situations in life, but I don't want to give away too much of what she says, so I'm going to say very little more. I also want to welcome today all our Donegal youth councillors who are present. It's very important you're here and we're very grateful. Give a very warm welcome to Anne-Marie McDade. Hi Anne-Marie, how are you?
Am I mic'd?
Yeah.
Great. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the lovely welcome. It's terribly bright here, so forgive me if I'm twinging a little bit. I was born at an early age in Ramelton. Went to the Loretto Convent in Letterkenny, just like the rest of you. Got on the bus, sent to Dublin, and joined the bank. Sensible job, the old pensionable job. Not necessarily, no. But in 1993, I was diagnosed with a very rare medical condition called Addison's disease, which means my adrenal gland doesn't work, and therefore I don't produce any natural adrenaline. Now, that's all boring information until I tell you what I tell you later on, so just bear that in mind for a moment. I was working normal life, everything was perfectly normal, and then in 2002 the Addison's disease just became unmanageable, and I had to retire from the bank due to medical reasons. Nothing at all to do with MS, but then in 2008 I was diagnosed with MS because I presented with a dropped right foot. So when I was jogging, I was somewhat fit, but very social. I was jogging along, my right foot would drop, so you'd be running along, and eventually the foot would drag on the floor if you didn't lift it or didn't stop. So I was confirmed some months later with this condition, with multiple sclerosis. quite frankly, I cried for Ireland. I couldn't see any positive angle from this. I couldn't see through the window. I couldn't see anything that was going to make me better from this. It was the torture of, and it's going back to everything we've heard this morning about the depression. I mean, this. When I say a cloud, it was like thunderous torture over you, because you cannot, when you're in that depressive form, you cannot see any light at the end of the tunnel. It was pure torture. Now, fortunately for me, prior to this, I had, through the Addison's disease, I had come up with this thing. I hadn't read it in a book. I just decided. I come up with this thing called a 10-minute rule. And what the 10 minutes was about was that if anything, for example, like the plumber didn't turn up, or something in your house wasn't working for some notion. For example, this morning, there was no hot water in this hotel. There's an example. For 10 minutes, you are allowed to be childishly rude. You can curse like bejesus. You can do anything you shagging like. You can bang saucepans in the sink. It doesn't matter what you do for 10 minutes. And then after 10 minutes, get over yourself. Enough. So I had led through my life, and I just thought this was very, very useful to me. But I thought, rethinking about this torture of this time that I was going through, the mental torture that I was going through with the diagnosis of MS, I thought, okay, well, let's spread this little 10 minutes business out of it. So instead of 10 minutes, I decided, okay, well, maybe I could spread it to, okay, there was 10 hours and there was 10 days. And I thought, I'll give myself 10 weeks. So for 10 full weeks, I cried for Ireland, but I was allowed to. And nobody around me could be told to tell me to get over myself, because for 10 weeks, I could do what I shaggin' liked. And if I wanted to, in the middle of a shopping centre, just burst out crying, then well be it. That's what I did. And after the 10 weeks, to be perfectly frank, it was like a grieving process. But after the 10 weeks, I was so bored with the bloody thing. I was so bored crying. I was just worn out. I was emotionally drained, because I had allowed myself that time where all I could think about was the downward graph. There was nothing else in my life that I could see anything other than torture with MS. So after the 10 weeks, and I knew the 10 weeks was coming, like towards the end of it, sort of 8 weeks into it, and I was saying, oh Jesus, I'm really, really fed up with this. And after the 10 weeks, I decided, okay, this has got to stop. And obviously I had prepared myself for a number of weeks for this. And you think, okay, what does one do with this? Now, physically, what you saw of me at the time was similar frame to what I am. I was 24/7 using a walking stick. My ability to walk was limited. In other words, the walk from here to the reception ladies would have been challenging enough. So you're talking 100 metres, maybe 200 metres. That would have been as much, without having to need to sit down. So everybody in this room, I know, particularly from Donegal, everybody has somebody connected to them that has MS. Let me tell you some things about it. When I had this 10 weeks and I was out the other side of the 10 weeks, I thought, okay, we've got to find a way of living with this experience. I didn't know how that was going to be. I didn't know where I was going to look for it, but I just knew that I had to go find something, because this was not the way the 10 weeks was going. This was not good for your life, because it was pure torture. You just didn't want it. Now, fortunately for me, because now I was registered with the Irish Wheelchair Association, because I was potentially one of them, I received one of their magazines, and inside this magazine there was this message, an advertisement of, again, everything's sent to me for a reason, and I totally believe that. There was an advertisement for anybody interested in partaking in the Paralympic Games for 2012. Why don't you come along to this day, an open day that we were having in the DCU on such a Saturday? I thought, that's what I'll do. I'll go along and I'll... Now, there was certainly maybe a year, we're talking a year in the difference in the time. I thought, I'll go along to this day because I used to be sporty. So I could do something, surely. Maybe, okay, I wouldn't obviously be able to do any athletics, and I thought maybe a bit of swimming. Okay, maybe I could do that, or they could teach me how to, and so on. I thought they'll have better ideas than I do. So I went along to this, myself and my other half, Peter, went along to this day, the open day. And I thought, as we were driving up there, and Peter very politely turned to me on the said day, and he said, I don't know if this is such a good idea for you, Anne-Marie. The average age of people going in were 14. Presenting at 42 years of age at that particular occasion, right? So, but I thought, okay, I've come this far, for Christ's sake. All they can tell me is bugger off. No, sorry, love. You can carry the bags, maybe. So, went in there, and pretty much the rest is history. From the point of view that I went in, I had a look around. The athletics were there, so I walked very speedily past that, as best I could on my stick, and went to the swimming, and then I saw cycling. I thought, do you know what? Maybe my arse is on the chin. I could maybe do a bit of that. Again, not knowing what sort of distance these guys would be cycling, or how much assistance you'd have. Or then I saw that they actually did a tandem cycle. In other words, there was an able-bodied person in the front. You've seen them all on the television, the tandem, the able-bodied person in the front and the disabled person on the back. And I thought, okay, well, maybe. And while there was a queue for the cycling, this is an actual truth, and they don't know this in the rowing fraternity, but there was actually a rowing seat. There was a rowing machine beside the cycling. I thought, geez, I need to sit down. Do you know what? I'll sit down over there. And I literally went to do this. And your man came in, are you going to have a go at the rowing? Absolutely, that's the reason I'm here. I rowed for Ireland. Thank you very much. That really wasn't necessary, but thank you. But I'm just saying that the Paralympic Games and everybody involved with the Paralympic Games are used to dealing with every condition that you can think of. And believe me, and there's 100 more conditions you can't think of. So they are used to dealing with the 42-year-old who walks in and the depression level is down here, and she feels that her physicality will not allow her to do X, Y, and Z. They'll prove you, well, you can't do that, but you can do A, B, and C. And that's the amazing thing about the Paralympics. So I would advertise it wholeheartedly, that it is definitely a very positive thing to do. There's a couple of things I just want to mention. I know I'm on the clock, so I'm conscious this woman keep looking at me. There's a particularly... I meant to say when I started off here that if anything I have learned from sport, it is generally the word perspective. Because perspective, it has allowed me to put my condition into perspective. It has allowed me to, no matter what condition or how you're feeling today or how grumpy you feel like when you wake up in the morning and the water's not hot and whatever, do you know what? There is occasionally hot water there anyway, so aren't I bloody lucky? So it teaches you, because I've been exposed to so many nationalities worldwide, of all the advantages and disadvantages of different conditions. But there's a couple of points I want to particularly, because I'm conscious that I'm in Donegal and I know there's a very high number of MS people in the county, is that I was rowing, here I was suddenly in the team, fantastic. Now, minor detail, didn't know how to row. So they had to teach me how to row, so that was great. That took a while. But believe this or believe this not, the first ever competition that I entered for rowing was the World Championships. So ridiculous when you think about it, but I actually was in the World Championships. Now, the reason I'm mentioning that is because that was actually in New Zealand. So off I flew in my greens, looking fantastic. Off we went. We were brilliant. But the point I'm making is that we left Ireland. It was November, so we left. It was maybe 10 degrees when we left. We arrived on the other side, and it was a beautiful 25 degrees. Now, this is what I want to sell about MS to everybody that's in this room, to take it home to somebody that you know that's connected. When I arrived on a Saturday. I arrived to the sunshine. arrived with the walking stick, 100, 200 metres. 7 days after I arrived in New Zealand, 7 days after, exposed to the sunshine. Now, bear in mind that we, as athletes, we were very strictly, you were factor 50 everywhere you went. So it wasn't that I was out 24/7 in the sunshine. But after 7 days in the sunshine, I walked 6 kilometres for the first time in 5 years. Now, please, no medic is going to tell me that there's no connection between MS and vitamin D. So please, please take that away to anybody that's connected to you that has MS. The importance of vitamin D. Sunshine. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk to you about is, and this goes back to the perspective. When you're competing in the Paralympic Games, and I was honoured to be that chosen person, after you competed, by the way, we only came 10th, although we had been 5th in the world previous ranking, so we weren't particularly pleased with our outing. But however, after we competed, you were still maintained in the commune, the sports. I'm trying to think of has lost it, but where the athletes are maintained, athletes' grounds or whatever.
Village.
Athletes' village. Thank you so much. The athletes' village, anyway, and it's really ginormous. It really, really. I mean, the village would be certainly the size of Ramelton. That would be the sort of size of village we're talking about. Yeah, it is ginormous. Now, to accommodate all of those people, and bear in mind you have every nationality from the world in this place. There was a food hall, and it was about the size of 4 football pitches. It was it was a man-made tent that was the size of 4 football pitches internally. And every nationality, there was the food for every nationality in the world was around the side. So if you fancied having Mexican food off, you went there. Or if there was even kosher food. And even though we had one of the sponsors, we had a McDonald's down in the corner. I know it's hard to believe in the sports facility, but there was McDonald's, our own very private, and everything was free. Everything for the athletes was free. But the point I want to finish off with is, on the day, whatever day, I decided I'd go to lunch on a particular day. Off I went anyway, pottering off on my own. You could easily go there on your own because all you had to do was look out for the green. And you say, okay, there's 2 guys from the table tennis, I'll go and eat with them. But I went along and I was walking over towards it. It was maybe 200 metres before the front door. I'm walking without a walking stick. Haven't used a walking stick since that time in New Zealand because I copped on about this vitamin D. Never used a walking stick ever since. Exactly. There's something to it, I promise you. So I'm walking over. And the next thing I spotted, now believe me, there was every condition that you can think of, and then double that about how worse you can imagine it would be. But anyway, this particular wheelchair was going towards, now again, millions of wheelchairs going towards this food court. But this particular chap caught my attention. Physically, what I'm looking at, I want to describe to you, no legs. There was stumps above the knee. There was no left arm, and he had to his elbow on his right arm. So that's all he had, up that, and 2 stumps in a wheelchair. And the elbow was doing the direction on the machine. So he had one of these sexy go faster jobs, right? So now, again, I lost my attention. I was thinking about how I was going to get home and, going to be so much celebration. And I thought, hold on a second. That guy's going to the food court. How is he going to eat? Because remember I said about the word perspective, right? So I thought, I'm completely intrigued with this. And I decided, okay, I'm going to name this dude. I called him Pedro. So I thought, I got to follow Pedro. Got to find out how this is going to happen. Now, bear in mind, it was the Paralympic Games, and inside this food court, you would often see carers around the place that were there for that purpose, or there was a lot of blind people that would needed attention and so on. So it wasn't unusual. I thought, Pedro's obviously going to wheel his way in, and there's going to be a carer there to see to his needs. Pedro went in anyway, and I followed him like 20 yards behind, trying to quietly do it on the side. And he got, again, the staff were all trained appropriately so that instead of being on the other side of the food barrier, they came immediately, saw the wheelchair. Right, Pedro, what are you having? So he got his meat and the 2 veg or whatever he was having. Now he had a tray on his own wheelchair. So he now had the tray with the food on it. Great. So now he's off to eat the stuff. Again, I'm saying, okay, well, that's a good achievement to get that far. But how is it physically, how from there to there? So anyway, Pedro wheels himself off and he falls in with his mates. I eventually found out, by the way, he's Vietnamese. So this dude anyway goes and joins his other Vietnamese people. And again, I was watching to see, because I seated myself appropriately distant away, and I watched to see, if I could see anybody that was going to be feeding him. There wasn't. I thought, how is he going to manage to get that meat into that? Right. The next thing, anyway, unknown to me, he had disappeared with this elbow, and it had disappeared in between the two stumps. And out he comes with this fork thing stuck into his arm. So he now had an extension on his arm. He had what you and I would appear by an artificial arm with chopsticks on the end. Looked like. So now he continued, not a bother on him, as if this was the thing he did every day. No problem at all. And he fed himself perfectly adequately with his chopsticks. No problem. And he even was so sophisticated, because he was so used to doing it, obviously, he even lifted a napkin, touched himself up with the napkin down. He was absolutely superb. And at that time, and hopefully only at that time, he had he was finished now, so that he goes down again and takes the addition of the arm off again. So he's now back to the elbow. But the next thing, he did catch me watching him. And I was mortified, absolutely mortified. I thought, oh, Jesus, I'm going to... And I, as you would, trying to cover yourself, he's just waving him. And that's when the moment I thought, perspective. I just went cold. Because I remember for that moment, that young fella can never wave at me. He'll never, ever be able to wave. So no matter what my condition, what I'm complaining about, think of Pedro. Thank you very much.
Oh,
that's me.
Great. Thanks so much, Anne-Marie. And we'll have questions at the end of the session. I'm now introducing our next two speakers. I'll tell you about Blana's Logan in a moment. But next up is Hugh Creel. He is an Irish traveller and a traveller rights activist. He's been working with the Donegal Travellers Project for over 10 years, and in that time he's emerged as a leader for the traveller community at both local and national level. He's going to talk to us today about the findings from the most recent Irish Travellers Health Study, which has found some shocking statistics, particularly relating to mental health and suicide among traveller men. Hugh Creel, you're very welcome.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. I suppose it's going to be hard to follow all the good speakers that spoke this morning, but I'm going to give it a go. I'd just like to welcome you. It's great to see a great conference, I guess, in terms of mental health, because sometimes there's a lot of agencies working on mental health, but we fail sometimes to come together and realise there is other people in the county who works an isolated condition sometimes regarding mental health. So it is great to see a conference that can bring all if you look around this morning, of all the stands and the people who's doing serious work out in the ground, late hours, above their working hours, and trying to tackle issues of mental health and suicide. So we were discussing the project, Sam, supporting aiding mental health. We were thinking, we'll come up with something else about this, Sam. So Paula had a great idea. She said, what about Save a Mate? And I said, geez, that's a brilliant idea in terms of, our logo. But I suppose to give you a little bit of background of where I come from. And I was born and raised in Killybegs. I left school at 12 years of age. I'm a traveller man. I'm a man. I'm a son, my mother's son. I'm a husband. And I come from a travelling background, which I'm very proud of. And, people often at conferences say, afterwards the conference, always go say to me, sometimes I'd get it at a majority of the conferences, Jesus, QE, you know what, you'd never think you were a traveller. you know. And I was standing there thinking, right, I'll not even responded because I just think, you know. But I remember starting back in 1998 when the manager, Siobhan McLaughlin, was doing interviews for Travart. And it was basically a recycling arts scheme with community development approach, right? So I thought this was great crack. I said, Jesus, this will be great crack. I'm getting a few pounds, I'll go up here to this course. And I realised during the development of the course and developing my own self-esteem and confidence and issues that I had from my own personal life of being a traveller man, that discrimination and racism was at the height of the travelling community. So I started to take upon myself through the project to build my confidence and build my knowledge and my education so I could go out and represent my people. And when I speak towards conferences and I speak for travelling community, I have a mandate for them. I'm not here speaking from Cllr Field that I'm a traveller. I actually consult with my community in terms of Donegal Travellers Project, where it is a community group where it started in 1996, where it brings travellers together in a safe place. There's no other place in this county where travellers gather like it gathers in Donegal Travellers Project, where they can feel safe and their culture is respected. And I suppose we're a partnership organisation as well. We work highly on the basis that settled people and traveller work in cohesion together. And we recognise travellers as an ethnic minority group. Minister Catherine Lynch was with us yesterday, and she launched her newsletter. And she just realised the intensive work that Donegal Travellers Project do in terms of advocating for the travelling community within this county. And I suppose as I said, we're human rights and we're a voice for the travelling community. Now I'm going to change my presentation in terms of the rest of the speakers this morning, because we did look at different issues regarding mental health. And mine is that I'm going to look far away in terms of Canada. Suicide and self-inflicted injuries are the leading causes of death of the First Nation Indians up to 44 years of age. So when you think about that, suicide is the first cause of death, right? Australia, if we go to Australia, originally, people have a higher rates of mental illness compared to the general population, experience twice the rate of mental distress, and twice less likely to be hospitalised for self-harm. So what is going on there? Think about what is happening to ethnic minority groups in terms of mental health, self and suicide. If we look at the USA, right, the African Americans are 20% more likely to report having serious mental distress than the white population, yet they are less likely to seek support from mental health services. And we can relate that back to the travelling community, because the travelling community are less likely to seek help from mental health services. But we in Donegal have a great practice in terms of the mental health service and Donegal Travellers Project, where we're jointly at the hip in terms of tackling mental health in this county within the travelling community. In the UK, over 20 studies for the past 30 years has shown that people of Caribbean and African origin have increased the risk of being treated for serious mental illness, including schizophrenia. And across these studies, the rate is seen as between 5 and 12 times greater than white people. So what mental health doesn't discriminate. So when we look at these statistics around ethnic minority groups, why is suicide 5 times higher? Why is people more likely to self-harm if they're from a black community, an ethnic minority group? We have to think about these things, right? I suppose the World Health Organization is saying health is a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being. And it's not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Right? So what determines health status? When we talk about health and the statistics of healthcare, healthcare only makes up 10% of it. 10% of your medical care. Right? Your behaviour, what you do yourself, makes up 30%, and your genetics make up 5%. Right? But your social aspect of it, who you are and where you fit in the community, is 55%. 55%. So if you're of self-belonging, how you feel about yourself and how the community reacts to you being yourself. And I'm going to put it back to the travelling community. I suppose the social conditions for the travelling community in terms of education. And I'll give you a wee brief background to where I come from, a family of 12. And I was the first traveller to get a diplomacy in social studies or in community development in the LYT out of a family of 12 of us. And my mother, she's... When I got home, and even doing this conference, I always give my mother leaflets or something if I've done. And she goes round Kelly Beggs, holding her head high. Did you see what my son Cutie done? Because everybody knows what I had done, because if I'm on the TV or whatever, she's round publicly, she's like my PR. But she's so proud of being a Traveller woman who has a Traveller son who can speak for Travellers. And we at Donegal Travellers Project, we put an emphasis on other Travellers, and there's plenty like me. There's colleagues in the audience here from the project can do as much as I can do. Left school early, come up here and speak, talk on behalf of the travelling community and represent our community. The education, I suppose, is a big barrier in terms of Travellers' children enrol in secondary school, and 63% is a dropout by the third year. So that's quite a shocking statistic. Unemployment, 97% of travel men are unemployed. And we look at the Celtic Tiger, and everybody talks about the boom that we had in Ireland, and we say, gee, everybody had a job, what happened? The building industry has collapsed. I can tell you, I'm in Traveller Works since 1998. Travellers in employment in Donegal certainly hadn't a very good success. Discrimination was at the height of travellers not getting accommodated in shops, hotels, garages. Once they heard your second name, if your second name was Stokes, Friel, McDonough, Ward, that was the first barrier. Same with people with disabilities. If I went in and was doing an interview, and 3 people from the audience was doing an interview, and I said, have you any medical conditions? Yes, I was depressed. I suffered from depression. And I say 90% of the time you'll not get that job. So when we look at racism, discrimination and isolation that people experience every day, I suppose, as I said, there's a huge gap in life expectancy. Primary health care projects, like we have one Donegal Travellers Project, where traveller men and women are working for equality in the area of traveller health. It's a partnership approach that we use, and we've always done that, in terms of health service, working for a range of areas, including cardiovascular health, health promotion, women's health, men's health, working with other people, and links to services. And as I said earlier on, we have a great model in terms of mental health and a partnership approach. And I know Anne-Marie will probably stand up here now in 2 seconds looking at me. But there's an All-Ireland Traveller Health Study that was conducted in 2010. And out of that study, there was over 40,000 travellers in Ireland living today. And over the research done in that study, there's only 8 people over the age of 85 years of age. 8 people. Right? We have only one traveller man in the county of Donegal who turned 80 last month. One man. There's nobody even close to him at this stage. There's nobody at 75, 76. We have travellers at 71, 72. But not the age barrier that the life expectancy that several people is reaching. So I will put it to you out of that study that I am a traveller man, and settled white men and black men and ethnic minority groups in this room. My life expectancy is completely different to yours. If your life expectancy for a settled man is 70 years of age, I am going to see the age of 55 expected to live. So there's quite shocking statistics in terms of the health of the travelling community. So a traveller woman is 11.6 years difference between a settled woman and a settled traveller woman. Now that gap has narrowed in terms of from 14 years down through the good work of our traveller organisations and primary health cares and the services, HSE services, and they're linking with the projects. So we looked at the mental health aspect in reference to the conference, and the research done regarding how you felt. 62.7% of traveller women stated that their mental health was not good 1 or more days in the last 30 days, compared to 19.9% of women who are with a medical card. So traveller women reported feeling isolated in periods of depression. Now I can only say for the people who conducted the survey on medical cards, this is not a generalisation of a national survey, but on the traveller community it is a national survey, but people settled women who had medical cards, there was research done in terms of mental health and depression. Now 59.4% of traveller men said that mental health was not good for more than 1 day in the last 30 days, compared to 21.8% of men with a medical card. Traveller men agreed that discrimination causes stress and said that stress was one of the biggest things in the travel community And it begins very early in life. And I can relate to that because I remember early in life being in school, being bullied in terms of being a traveller, being called a knacker, a gypsy. Don't sit beside him, he's a smell. You know, when we talk about mental health issues and we talk about people who develop mental health issues in their later life, something caused it. Within the traveller community, we can nearly all relate back to school. And we do a lot of work at the project in terms of traveller women, traveller men, and we can always relate back to school days. Education, where they first feel discrimination. There's no discrimination in my family. I was grand when I was at home. I was in an environment where I was accepted as a traveller. But when I went into settled population, where I went to school, then there was the problem. There was something wrong with me. So, when we look at that, there are 124 deaths of travel men in 2008. 1/3 from external causes, including accidents and suicide. Traveller men suicide rate is 6.6 times higher than the national average. We are dying, committing suicide 6.6 times higher than the settled population. So out of 40,000 people, if you think of a town like kind of Sligo, and there was 40,000 people, and the suicide was 6.6 times higher, it'd be an epidemic. There'd be an outcry by the government to sort of see what's going on. If we look at the experience of discrimination, over half of travellers worried about their unfair treatment, right? Many travellers who experience discrimination in very different settings, like shops, as I said earlier on, schools, pubs, hotels, whatever. 35% of travellers, 35% of travellers have experienced discrimination. Younger travellers report higher levels of discrimination than older people. And I just want to bring it back to what some of the things people say in power, right? Because it has a devastating effect on the travelling community. People might think sitting saying things in courts or as a politician or whatever hierarchy position you're in. But I can tell you it has a devastating effect on the travelling community. Like one of the judges said that nobody has indicated to me, but I suspect these come from a certain ethnic background that would give me even more than given the type of behaviour in which some of these engage. They're like Neanderthal men, living in the long grass, abiding by the laws of the jungle. So Judge Seamus Hughes said that about the travelling community in the Athlone District Court. Right? At the sitting of the Tuam District Court, Judge Jeffrey Brown is reported describing burglars as knackers. Right? And encouraging homeowners to use maximum force against them. But my point is that if people in power can see and position themselves and say in derogatory terms around the travelling community, what does that give people on the ground? If people is in power with a position that they're supposed to uphold and show a leadership role, they're not showing much of a leadership role if they're discriminating against a group and influencing racism that already exists within an Irish society. So, the 5 things people are talking about this morning have to keep them well. I thought about this and what we should do in terms of putting them into brackets for the travelling community. So, the road to mental well-being. If you see our stand is over there, there's leaflets over there for anybody who wants to. We developed a leaflet regarding mental health a few years ago, specifically for the travelling community, because there's high percentages of illiteracy within the travelling community, so how can we relate to them? So we do 2 pictures, sometimes 2 drama, so different initiatives that we do this. So accepting who you are, DTP, Donegal Travellers Project, the wider traveller movement, is building traveller pride and giving the traveller community and young travellers a particular sense of confidence and self-esteem. Family and friends. So we all need family and friends to speak to. As Frank related this morning, how his family was a rock for him. So within the travelling community, the sense of family, we have a sense of belonging within our family. So it's helped to make you feel included and cared for. Travellers suffer from high levels of stress and isolation, and often do feel welcome, or often do not feel welcome or accepted as part of the community. Donegal Project has been doing relationship building with work since the very beginning between travellers and settled people, and more recently with other ethnic minority groups. I actually love this wee picture, because if you think about it, everyone else seems so happy and normal. I wish I wasn't the only person with mental health issues, but the 3 of them thinking the same thing. So, talking about your feelings, through our mental health project, We have delivered a range of initiatives in positive mental health and suicide prevention to traveller families throughout Donegal. Over 100 members of the travelling community have completed Assist and Safe Talk. Through this work, we have been breaking the silence, challenging mental health stigma and building positive mental health, one conversation at a time. And I remember that we had Assist trainer in Tommy Rosney and the Donegal Travellers Project, and there was traveller men in the room that were going on a Croagh climb. And I also would interact an activity afterwards to debrief yourself. And I remember traveller men crying in the room, and we're going up Croagh, talking to them one-to-one in terms of their experience of suicide. So I think everybody experiences sometimes in their life of suicide, mental health issues, or something in their family that comes. But keeping fit and active, I suppose, in the context of the thing, the conference, experts believe that the huge link between mental health, well-being and exercise. Our men's and women's fitness programme have successfully engaged over 200 men and women in walking, cycling, football, swimming and the gym. Going as a group and being supported helps to break their fear of being welcome, which is prevented by travellers from participating. So when we say, why is travellers not participating? So when I talk to my men's group of, like, why do you not interlink with other services? They've said the fear of not being accepted. And they sometimes get a poor reception, because I can acknowledge that in terms of, running the men's football club, that sometimes I'm accounted for. Will you make sure you look after them? Are you responsible? We're going to have a game of football. So even the discrimination with travellers trying to integrate into wider society, they always hold somebody accountable. Are you accountable for these people? So keep fit and active. Ask for help. Travellers have traditionally been very slow to admit there is a problem and to look for help. Our mental health projects offer information and advice in a buddy system for members of the community who need help. And I'd like to finish with this picture. Before you criticise me, it says, walk in my shoes. Maybe you'll understand. So thank you.
Well That's fantastic, Hugh. I'm not surprised your mum is very proud of you when you speak. Now listen, I know you're all looking forward to your lunch, but give it up for this next one, because it's very important. And then we probably won't take very many questions, but we'll see. Bláthnaid Logue is a tenant support worker with Cllr Ireland and has experienced mental health difficulties since her teenage years. She's now 34 and mum to 2 young kids. She's passionate about breaking the silence around mental health and challenging the stigma and discrimination, which is what we were talking about earlier this morning. Please give a very, very warm welcome to Bláthnaid, who can talk about her own experience and also about recovery. Bláthnaid.
Welcome. You're the greatest. I'm going to keep this really short, because I don't know about anybody else, but I'm starving. Everybody here speaking today, they seem to be an expert in their own field. However, the only thing I'm an expert in is myself, and even that I only learned about a few years ago. I was diagnosed with depression when I was 19 years old, but I had been suffering from it for a long time before that. I'd been self-harming from I was 14. By the time I reached 20, I was severely underweight. It's hard to believe now when you look at me, but that is true. I would have went weeks without speaking. And it wasn't that my mental health had deteriorated. It was more a fact that...
I don't know what's happening to that microphone. Try again.
Sorry.
You're brilliant. It's the microphone.
Thank you. It wasn't that my mental health had deteriorated. It was more that, sorry, is that...
Do you have one of these on as well?
Yeah,
I wonder, would she be better just using that microphone?
Yeah, well...
Do you mind?
No, not at all.
Away from that one.
Yeah, I'll just stand here.
Yeah, you're brilliant.
I didn't think this could get any worse, but I have to be the one that the mic stops working completely. As I was saying, when I stopped talking, it wasn't that my depression had worsened or that I had developed another diagnosis. It was the sound of my voice. I a thing that people would have to realise was I was not aggressive. I was never a danger to anybody else. But I despised myself to the point that my voice annoyed me. I would have covered mirrors because I couldn't look at myself. I was surrounded by beautiful sisters and mother and was embarrassed by how I looked. This wasn't something that was every single day. I always had that feeling like as if my heart was broke. You know, I was walking about with this sort of, everybody's had their heart broke at some point, you know what I mean. I always walked about with that feeling. There was sometimes, obviously, the self-harming got worse, but it wasn't, the feelings were always there, but it obviously got worse at stages, at different stages of my life. And between that, I got married to my wonderful husband, Mark. I have to say that, or he'll be raging. And I have 2 fantastic children. And you would imagine that I would be happy with that. But, that wasn't enough either.
Could I get that hand mic, please? One from the floor. To be fair to Blanc, because that's just very annoying. Just give me one of the mics, then we can give it back to the floor. Is that okay? I think that's a better idea.
Yeah.
Do you mind?
No, not at all.
Maybe, can you take that thing off? Do you mind?
No, not at all.
I'll help you get it off.
That's okay.
They're really annoying, those microphones.
They are.
The Britney Spears mics, that's what they're called.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking my daughter would love this.
So we'll get you a microphone. I'll take that from you.
That's great.
You okay? Sorry about that.
No. Do you think this will be better? Yeah? Is that okay now? Right. Try again.
No problem.
Thank you.
She's just pouring her a vodka here. It's water. It's water. I know.
Thank you. I'm just trying to eyeball Jared Finnegan here, who talked me into doing this, and he's not making eye contact here with me. So. But as I was saying again, so I got married and I had these wonderful, healthy children, which is a huge thing because I have a brother and sister with a wasting disease. So there was obviously a lot going on in my family from a very young age. And I was happy, not happy, I was never happy. I was never comfortable with who I was. But I functioned, I got up and did the right things, I existed, I didn't live. After I had my second child, my wee boy Fenton, I lost my womb, and everybody stood back thinking, that's it, she's had self-destruct, she'll go again now, they were all waiting on it, and you would imagine that's what would happen. I was 26 and had a hysterectomy. But it didn't go that way because I never do anything in a predictable sort of way. I was fine with losing my womb, which seems really odd, and even seems odd me saying it, because I thought in a way I deserved it. I had got above my station. Who did I think I was? My big house in the mountain, with my 2 children and my husband with this good job. So it was perfectly okay that this happened to me because this is what I deserved. But the real problem started with me was when my daughter started school and I had no control anymore, or I felt I lost control. Who would help her if anything happened? What if somebody hurt her? And these things, I was constantly feeding myself all these doubts and fears, and I had no way to protect her anymore. She was away for a few hours every day. I went downhill very quickly after that. People were saying to me, but Mark, my husband, and my mum, Blonde, you need to talk to somebody, you need to see that. I actually thought that maybe there was something wrong with them, that they were always looking for a problem because I didn't see this one coming, and I usually do. This one came very quickly. My GP, who's a fantastic man, was extremely compassionate and kind to me at a time when I couldn't be kind to myself. He put me on new medication. I have to say, I've always had to use medication from right on through. I was I couldn't function without it. Everybody's different. Frank had spoke earlier today about how he didn't need it. I unfortunately did. And if I got sick tomorrow when they offered it to me, I would take it again. I'm sorry, but that's just how it worked for me. Try to speed this up. The thing is, I eventually went to psychological therapy, and that was traumatic. And that happened over years. I assumed when I was going to therapy that I would go on maybe 6 months, year tops, and I would be fine after I'd walk out a new woman. It didn't work that way. I went on for a very long time. It was put off because through the stress of the psychological therapy, I developed autoimmune urticaria, which sounds really great, but it's hives. That's all it is. I was covered in hives. And it was just the stress, just triggered it. But I still battered on, and I had great support from my husband. My children were very young, thank God that they didn't have to see this struggle. My parents were brilliant, my in-laws. I had known Jared Finnegan for a long time, and when I got to the point that I wanted to, I'd been out of work for a year. I hadn't worked since I was a teenager, and I couldn't, the very thought, it just made me physically sick. They thought that I'd go out and leave myself so vulnerable to people that could hurt me, And I approached Jared with this, that maybe he would give me a chance and make me a volunteer with Cllr, and I don't know what happened, he agreed, and that's how I came on with Cllr. I don't know what, everybody's recovery is different, everybody's story is different, and somebody else could be diagnosed with depression, but they'll never perceive it the way I have. That's just it. My recovery to me was being okay with myself. I never am going to be an outstanding beauty. That's perfectly okay, right? And I'm never going to be as smart as my husband, and that's all right as well. I am who I am, and I am a mother and a daughter and a sister and an employee and somebody who has mental health difficulties and lots of bad things as well. I do have some bad points. But the point I'm trying to make is my mental health difficulties only make up a very small part of who I am. I'm more than my mental health difficulties.
That was absolutely brilliant, Blonde. Seriously, you spoke so well, and you're way more than any kind of mental health issues you've ever had. You're incredibly impressive, and you're probably way more intelligent than your husband.
Hear, hear.
Now listen, I'm going to throw it out briefly for a few questions, then you will be fed because a fantastic lunch awaits you. But listen, if we got a question here, anyone want to ask a question? Great, there's a lady down there. Or it's a gentleman, sorry.
Thank you.
No, it wasn't that I thought you were a lady.
That's perfectly okay.
It's Dr. Sharkey, is it? It is.
I've been called many things. But I would like to congratulate Donna on her courage. I was truly impressed.
Oh.
And as a clinician, I suppose I'm being very scientific when I ask the question, what was it that prevented you, maybe about the service or whatever, from seeking help earlier?
What stopped you earlier from seeking help?
There's no microphone.
I need a microphone for Blonde. Do you mind, Blonde? Fine. She's going to go up there.
That's a great question, and to tell you the truth myself, really, the services were available. There's more services available now than there was when I was a young teen. But I had shame. I had real shame. And not just about my mental health difficulties, about other things, It's something that I talk to my daughter's now 11 and my son's 9, and I say to them, I talk constantly about my own mental health difficulties. I don't go into details. They don't need to know about self-harming and not eating and, medication. But just that Mommy had mental health difficulties. I don't want them ever to be in the position that I was in as a young teenager, feeling that I couldn't approach anybody about these things. There are services available. I didn't avail of them. Shame being part of it. And also, I come from this real strong Irish woman, They just coped with everything, had real horrific things, and they just battered on with life. And life battered them down, and they got up every single time. And I suppose I wanted to be like that, and I wasn't. And that's all right as well.
Yeah, no, it's not. Great answer, Bond. Do we have another question? I can't see one. Can any of you see one?
Not at all.
I think their stomachs are beckoning. But look, I'll thank them in a moment, just to say lunch is going to be from 2 to 2:30 if you can, because Jim McGuinness was meant to start speaking at 2. But if you could come back as near to 2:30 as possible, that would be brilliant. You're to go down to the ground floor, wait out the front door, turn left, and it's the first door on the left. Meanwhile, I just want to thank these 3 amazing people. They were all so amazing in their own right.
Thank you. Thank you.